morning, everybody. Namaskaram. First of all, I want to say that it's an absolute honor for me to be here to deliver the first M.R. Narayan Kurup Memorial Lecture. I sincerely thank Dr. Uday Kumar and all the organizers at Madappally College. And a very special thanks to Mr. Abhilash for giving me this opportunity, for thinking me worth this lecture. I'm going to talk today about the writer's responsibility, but around it, I'm going to really raise questions about the writer in society, the writer and society, and also the writers, the responsibility of society towards writers. I think too easily we talk about what the writer owes society, and there is a fairly functional and taken for granted role of the writer that is assumed. And I'm going to try and raise a few questions, and I'm going to be deliberately provocative to make us all think anew about this subject. I'm always very pleased when I see students in the audience. I think students are where real hope lies for tomorrow. So I really look forward to an interaction. And I'm going to start by telling you a few anecdotes from my own writer's journey to introduce this subject of the writer in society. What is the writer in society? How does society in general and in ordinary terms and in everyday terms see the writer in their midst? So I'm going to start with some personal. And since these anecdotes are about me, it will also become about being a writer who writes in her mother tongue, that is Hindi in my case, and being a writer who happens to be a woman. So these few anecdotes are what I'm going to start with. Some of them will sound a little frivolous to you, but I think they're very telling and carry some serious messages. So let me start with the first. I have been writing for some time already, and contrary to what a lot of people think about writers and artists, that they're leading a very glamorous life, it's actually a very boring life, because much of the time you're just indoors by yourself, indoors or outdoors, but in solitude, alone, and you're writing. So it's a very lonely life. And I thought one day that this won't do, and let me try and glamorize it a bit. And I thought of writers like Tagore, with his flowing beard and dramatic robes, or like our Hindi icon Krishna Softi, wearing the most resplendent shararas and gararas, and a Himachali topi, and a dramatic bandi, nice jutis. So I thought, a writer should be somebody who enters the room and you immediately turn and you think, oh, somebody has come in, some dramatic personality. So where do I begin? Well, I didn't have the courage to completely change my costume, but I thought, let me start with reading glasses. So I went to the spectacle shop and started hunting for frames which would make my personality a little more dramatic and writerly. Started looking at these frames, and of course the shopkeeper was there to help and to suggest and to encourage me to buy an expensive frame if possible. So there were these very funny, some with hearts all over them, some with flowers, some with some dramatic lacy pattern, silver, glitter. And I kept trying them on, taking them off. Then I settled for one which looked not so bad. The upper portion was thick and a dramatic red, but the lower portion was plain white. And I thought, I put that on, and I thought maybe it will work. It's a halfway house. So I turned to my husband and I said, so how does it look? I'm looking like a writer. Am I looking like a writer? So the shopkeeper, to comfort me and convince me, jumped in with gusto. And he said, not at all, madam. So you get the point? He was convinced that I could not possibly want to look like a writer. If I had said, am I looking like a film star or some top politician or top bureaucrat, he would have said, yes, of course, madam. But looking like a writer, not at all, madam. So that tells you how people think about writers, nothing very much to covet out there. Then, let me go on to another anecdote. I was writing for some time, and some books had come out, some interviews, some reviews had come out, and a relative of mine, someone I'm very fond of, he came home and he said, yes, I saw your interviews, yes, I saw your reviews, and I gave him these books. I autographed them and I gave them to him. And in the course of the conversation, he said, so what are you doing these days? So I said, I was surprised. I said, come on, we just talked about it. You have my book and you're saying, what do I do? So he said, no, I know you write, but what exactly do you do? What actually do you do? So again, note that writing is not considered by a lot of the ordinary people as being something which is doing something. So he saw it as something, okay, you do it for pleasure, but what actually do you do? The third story I will say is about my mother tongue, my writing in the mother tongue. From the time that I've been writing, and even today when I'm better known and people know I'm a Hindi writer, as soon as they learn that I'm a writer, I'm either asked, which language do you write in? Or I'm asked, why do you write in Hindi? Why not in English? So, this is such a strange question to ask a writer. Why do you write in your mother tongue and not in a foreign language? I know English is not a foreign language like it used to be, but even then, my mother tongue is my mother tongue. Why should it surprise anybody? Nobody asks a French person, why you write in French and not in English? This question is asked in India of educated people. It is assumed that education means that you work through the English medium and not through your mother tongue. Again, there's a story for us to mull over out there. The final little anecdote I want to tell in this section of mine is about being a woman who's writing. Now, I'm a fairly lucky woman, privileged woman. I've not had any obvious discrimination in my writing career. But I think there's nobody who escapes what we shall call systemic discrimination. A certain way of viewing women, what we often call the male gaze in patriarchal societies, which is very much prevalent and which will be cast even on the most privileged and lucky women like me. Now, how does that happen? What do? It's just to not to take your work in the same sort of way as you might a male writer. Today is different, and I told you I'm lucky, but I'm talking of the general run of women writers. They are seen either to be doing something which is limited. Oh, women deal with family and home. They get too personal. Or they try to be bold and they talk about sensuality and their bodies. So they're seen in that way. Or it is said with great admiration, oh, she's written a book which is not about women. It is a, larger topic. Like I have a book on communalism, and it said, and Geetanjali Shree has extended her work beyond women. So this shows a certain limited way in which we view subjects to do with women and the women's side of the story. The way we view home, it shows the limitation of the people who are saying that, or the limited and narrow gaze of the people who are saying that, rather than the limited and narrow hold of those who are writing that. Because we all know that every grain of sand holds the world, every drop of water holds the ocean. So there's nothing like home being limited, or the story of something small being small. Small and big are not separated, and in any case, home and world, that divide, I think, is an artificial divide created by men, if I may say so. So I'm just telling you these small anecdotes to point to you a certain casualness with which writers are taken in our society. Now, why is that? Now, I think about it, what are the views people have about writers in society? If they are very kind to them, then they will say writers are innocent creatures, well-meaning entertainers. Indulge them up to a point. Otherwise, they'll say writers are parasites who are wasting the resources of the society, wasting the time. We don't have to support them too much. I mean, up to a point, let them be, but more than that, we don't need to deal with writers. And of course, if the writers are trying to rake up controversial subjects, then they are pests. Because they should do their work quietly and not disturb anybody. Why are they doing things which are creating controversies in society? So this is how, in general, writers are being looked at. And you can also see this borne out by something serious like the allocation of funds and resources, not just in India, but the world over, to subjects like literature and the arts. You will see what a skewed balance it is. Much less is given to art and literature, always much more to subjects like science and technology. Again, why is it? What is it in our way of seeing literature and the writer which makes us think that this is fair? Why do we feel that the writer is not really such a useful category after all? So let me tell you another little anecdote. This is from an experience I had in Japan. In Japan, they had a movement called Yamagishi movement, which was a movement that believed in equality and the absence of private property. So there were people, like-minded people, who made Yamagishi communities and divided everything equally, participated in society equally, which meant that everyone had the same kind of houses. Even children did not belong to individual parents. For 2 years, the parents had the children with them, and then they went to a commune and were looked after by everybody together. All the work was done by rotation by everybody. So no work was higher than the other, or no work was lower than the other. So everyone in turns, was milking the cows, sweeping the floors, doing agriculture, cleaning dishes, cooking, everything was done together. And when they had parties, there was a common collection of clothes and shoes and jewelry, and they could go and borrow it for the time, wear those, have the party, and then clean them up and put them back. This was a very, I think, idealistic experiment. And of course, I was very impressed looking at all that. But I was a young writer, and I worried for my profession. And I asked them, I said, where is the place in your society for people like me? Because if you're going to keep me busy with all the chores that have to be done for the community, how will I write? For writing, I need to be left alone. I need to be allowed to look like I'm doing nothing. I need to be allowed to sit under the tree and stare at the sky and count the stars. But you will say that this is useless activity. So this question came up in that little experience. And the Yamagishi people, I didn't have to deal with them much more, and all they said to me was that, we have a policy that if some inmate has a concern, then we have a meeting and we decide jointly what to do about the new need. So that was their business. But it made me think again about why a writer who's under the tree and staring at the sky and counting stars is seen as being useless to society or seen as wasting time. Before I say a little bit more about that, about the usefulness of the writer to society, let me talk about this thing called literature and how it is made. I'll speak in a few cliches, but I think cliches say certain important general things. So what is literature? Literature is stories. It is the story of the world and of human beings. It is the story of you and me, of life. To tell this story, you have to sit in a place of literature which is made of quiet and reflection, where you almost have to meditate. Because it is only then that you notice, that you observe details which you would not otherwise. Literature and its place is what stops you in your tracks when you're rushing through the activities of life and the world. It stops you and makes you quiet and makes you think and notice all around you. And when you do that, when you observe, then you also start wondering about things. Then you start raising questions. Then you start having doubts. Then you start rethinking many things which you thought you already knew. And this goes on, and this is a process which in fact takes forward knowledge and takes you forward in the search for truth and meaning. So it is such an important area. I would say that literature is about dialoguing with yourself and with the world. Just think about it. It cannot be done in a hurry. If you are quiet and you're looking at the same things around you, you're looking at the sunset. The sunset you see every day and you just go past it. But if it becomes your concern and your obsession to be still and look at the sunset, be patient as literature demands, to be patient and to be still, then you start noticing that each sunset is different. Then you start noticing colors in the sunset which you had never seen before. And what is that doing? That is honing your sensitivities, honing your subtleties, all of which is actually making you more civilized, I would say. This material that now you have in front of you, the material of life which you are looking at quietly, becomes the material with which, in a way, you sculpt. And as you sculpt, you are searching for shapes and meanings, and that is what literature is. But, and this is also important, are we only looking at the surface of reality around us? Are we only describing that surface? Never. That's not enough. Because behind the surface lies many other layers of reality. And that is what, when you have stopped to stare and observe and experiment and explore, that is what starts to show. And you start uncovering those layers in the world, but also inside yourself. You go to the innermost recesses of yourself, to the dark interiors, and you begin to pull those out. So a writer is not just pulling out what they are consciously knowing. A writer is also interested in what their subconscious, their semi-conscious knows. So it's almost like pulling out sometimes your entrails and putting it in public and viewing it in public. Pulling out these entrails is obviously can be something very painful. It can be a shock both to the writer and the reader. And it may not always be a view that everyone can accept. Again, I point to an important thing here. A writer is pulling out her entrails, but a writer is never somebody who represents only herself. I am part of humanity. I am part of my society. My entrails actually are also the entrails of society. What Jung calls the collective unconscious, that is what I am able to bring forth. This is something, the worth of which people don't easily understand. If you think of writers like Kafka and the absolutely dark world around him that he described, or closer home, you think of a writer like Tagore and his worry about enthusing the mobs that Gandhi was doing, or whipping up nationalist sentiment that was happening in that time. Tagore was worried about both these things, that it would lead to mobocracy, it would lead, nationalism is an evil which will lead to a certain different kind of identity politics, and it will divide people. And that he kept warning in his writings, in his speeches. And both Kafka and Tagore were denounced by no less than the great leftist thinker Lukács, who called Tagore a goon of the imperialists, agent of the imperialists, and called both these writers reactionary. But today, we have come a long way, and we realize that both these writers were uncovering uncomfortable truths that humankind hide within themselves. So, the fact is that literature is showing you the world much better. You have to know what it is. And when you know what it is, you start asking questions, and only then you can move forward. Can this be a useless activity? I think the answer is obvious. It is not. But the question remains, why is literature not given its due? Why is a writer not seen as someone very important for the running of society? Why is literature not turned to in freedom and faith to understand how to conduct society better? And I think the reason lies at least in two things. There may be others, but at the moment I'll only mention these two things. One is our past, which was a colonial past. And the second is our present, which is a completely confusing, carnivalesque circus playing around us. The colonial past made literature something functional. It felt the impulse for literature in a completely different way, geared towards the purpose of nationalism and reform. It worked very well for that time. Social realism was the order of the day. The problem is, it is a hangover we carry in ourselves even today. The second is our confusing present, which is full of such ferment, such changes, and at such a stormy pace that we are very disturbed and we want instant answers. And that is the point I'm trying to get to. We have become seduced by this idea of instant everything, instant answers, instant results. We don't have the time for meditations, ramblings, musings. We need to see immediately how a problem is being resolved, so we can understand and respect an engineer, because he makes a bridge and we can cross the river in spate. We can respect a scientist who goes into the lab and walks out with the COVID vaccine. We can understand the doctor and respect him because we see that he or she saves lives. But a writer, there's nothing to see. There's nothing so dramatic, there's nothing so instant. Answers are not the protocol of writers. Clarity, offering clarity is not the protocol of literature. Opaqueness and confounding is. In the storm raging round us, we expect literature to somehow be like the doctors and the engineers and the scientists. But that cannot be. When we are surrounded by the storm, we cannot write about it in the way we need to. We need a different kind of distance and detachment from the subject. We need to see our subject like a canvas out there to be able to describe it. So what happens? People either limit the notion of what literature is. It is something which is immediate, which gives you an instant report of something, and they are able to understand that, or they devalue literature. And now I come to the worrying thing. They start putting pressure on the writer to be immediate, to respond to the pressures, immediate pressures around. And now This is related to the subject of the responsibility of the writer, but also to the bit that I'm adding to the subject, the responsibility of the society to the writer. So I express here a worry. The times, society, the state, market, they can all put pressure on authors and on literature to take care of society in a particular way. But I am saying, a little provocatively, it has to be a two-way relationship. Society must also take care of literature and let it flourish and let it happen. How? By letting it be itself. Ultimately, literature is about a literary act, which can even be auto-referential, which creates its own world, which only seeks ratification from that world. Each genre must have its freedom in a civilized society. Literature is important as the carrier of culture. Literature preserves language, takes language forward, and language is not just a medium. Language is not just a tool. Language is a complete entity in itself, and language represents a culture and a way of being and seeing and expressing, and literature is taking that forward. So good literature enriches culture and must be allowed to do that, which takes us to the subject of freedom. To discover, to go on the search, which is literature's purpose. It has to be free to play. It has to be free to get lost, go into the wilderness and find a way out. Literature is huge, but not just a means towards an end. It is an end in itself. I think we have to think about these questions of writer, literature, society, responsibility. Again, I owe society, but I also owe literature something. I'm a citizen. I'm many things. I'm a citizen. I'm a woman. I'm many identities, which may impinge on each other and take and lend from each other, but they cannot be one on top of the other. As a citizen, I'm in the middle of my society. As a writer, I want to be a little distant from that society. As a citizen, my time is now. As literature, my time is infinite. It is in that space of literature that I need to be able to contribute what I can to my society. For this, I said, I need freedom. It is a relationship with my medium that I need to be left to explore and play with. It is a relationship of love. And in a relationship of love, many things happen. You tease each other. You have fun. But it all comes from the impulse of love, from the impulse of bonding, not from the intention of hostility or insult. That is why literature will play around with things, topple them over, turn them upside down, in what I'm describing as healthy humor and irreverence, which is only something to make us laugh and love together. It is not something to divide us and create enmities between us. And I'll give only two small examples. I remembered a story written by a writer in your state. A story whose title I've forgotten, but the writer is Paul Zakaria. And the story is about meeting God in the morning. When the man was going with his son cycling, he saw God cycling towards him. So already there's a smile when you read the story. And God had all kinds of tricks and possibilities and power up his sleeve. And he did all that to make the son happy. But when he heard, now I can't remember the story very exactly, but when he heard a musical piece being whistled out, God was stumped. He could not get that right. And that upset, disturbed God, and he wanted to learn that piece of music. And it was music by, pardon my pronunciation again, Babuka, some great musician in your part of the country. And in front of Babuka and in front of music, and perhaps in front of art, God also bowed and wanted to sit at Babuka's feet to learn music. Now, if you decide to be stupid, you will say this is irreverent, but it's not. It's done with a lot of healthy love and humor. The point is, in life and in art and literature, there is nothing sacrosanct in such a way that you cannot touch it. Of course, you can play with these things. And like I said, literature and art is only about binding people, creating hope and humanity, bringing them together with love, not about dividing and creating hostilities. The other example is from a temple mural. It's a Hindu temple, and in the mural, many scenes of the gods have been painted. And there's one scene in which I think Ram and Sita, or whether Ram alone or Ram and Sita both, are sitting in front of the sacred fire. And near them, on a slightly higher level, is Hanuman, and he's pissing. And the stream of his piss is falling straight into the fire. You want to start interpreting it in some horrible ways, then you are taking it completely in some other direction. There is great love between Hanuman and Ram, and this is some kind of play between them, and it does not question that love at all. This is the space of freedom which any genre has to be allowed. It cannot, no genre can be conducted by prescribing and proscribing things, either by society, market, state, anybody. Here, I'm going to say another provocative thing. Fundamentalists are known to object to things and to tell writers and artists what they must do and what they must not. But I want to say that even progressives who mean very well, they also start proscribing and prescribing. That a writer has to attend to this pressing evil of society and work on that. Or even that a writer should at the moment write less and become more of an activist in the way they understand activism. And I beg to differ. You have to understand, first of all, my activism and my way of being political. My activism is between the two covers of a book. My activism takes a different set of time. Of course, there will be moments when the citizen in me will want to jump out on the street and join all of you in some movement, but I will still hanker for and demand and request that my space and solitude be given to me, where in a sense the personal and political can be kept separate and I can do my work. Just as you have to leave a scientist and an engineer alone to do their work, you have to leave a writer alone to do her work. If she does her work well in that solitude, she is fulfilling her responsibility towards society. That is important. But people will say, you use the word freedom. What do you mean? How far are you going to take that freedom? How free can that freedom be? To that, I will say, the curbs on freedom must not come from anywhere else. The guidance to freedom has to come from within. People have to be made more and more aware through dialogue, through debate, through agreement and disagreement, and carrying that conversation forward about what is advisable and what is not. So, what we have to do is to have a cultured society where people become more sensitive towards each other. But this cannot happen with curbs imposed from elsewhere. Sensitivity has to come from inside you. In Hindi, we use the word vivek. You should have the vivek to distinguish between what falls this side and what falls that side. To give just a small example, we have mostly been a patriarchal society the world over. It's the last bit of my lecture, by the way. This society has been male-dominated. Language has been male-dominated as well. There are certain expressions which have come into language. I don't know if you have it in Malayalam, but in Hindi we do. People use those expressions very innocently. They say, you must have seen it in films sometimes, that if somebody is behaving cowardly and scared, they say, you are no fighter, go home, wear bangles. Or a parent can scold her or his son, small boy, and say, stop crying like a girl. Or, as you know, in films, we will have these songs where the woman will be talked about as if she is some snack to enjoy, some Coca-Cola to be drunk. Now, these are, as a woman, it hurts me. As a woman, I would like men to become aware about this in their language and become sensitive towards it and tailor their language, which slowly they are doing and they will do. But it has to come with an ongoing dialogue between us, not by violence and punishment. So what I'm saying is that freedom encourages creativity, sensitivity, and confidence. Censorship crushes the soul and limits knowledge and makes dwarfs of us. Absolutely, in the end now, what do I say? Except that for writers, writing becomes like breathing. It is as natural as breathing. How can I not breathe? Therefore, how can I not write? I have to breathe. If the atmosphere is conducive to good breathing, the oxygen is plentiful in the air, like in your Kerala forest cover areas, then I'm lucky. I breathe easy. If it is like the polluted air of Delhi, even then I have to breathe. I have to find strategies of doing it. The point is, the writer has to write, whether in fear, whether in stealth, whether in happiness and friendliness, but the writer has to write, or else she may die. If that is murder, it'll be through murder, or else it'll be suicide. I think this is what we all need to think about jointly, the relationship of the writer and society based on love and mutual respect, and full of fun, freedom, and hope and bonding. Sensitivity, not censorship, guiding it. Thank you.